Players begins our 27th week of live readings with Jane Austen's Emma. I am TJ. I am our technical director. All of the actors you'll be hearing tonight are volunteering their time and their talent from their homes to bring a little bit of entertainment into your homes. Many of them first met each other 15 minutes ago when they first logged into this Zoom meeting. We want to thank them very much for joining us. We would also like to thank our friend, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare and off-screen wife for hosting this on his page and for joining us tonight. Check out his website at shakespeareapproves.com, his Patreon at patreon.com/Shakespeare. Find out more about him at that website or by visiting his Facebook page, Shakespeare Approves, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. As always, we want to acknowledge and thank all of the medical professionals and essential workers who have been working tirelessly to keep us all as healthy and safe as possible so that we can continue to do this. We also want to acknowledge those demonstrating and protesting for bravely pushing forward the simple fact that Black Lives Matter. If you are interested in more information about our totally volunteer organization, check out our website, zenithplayers.com. Feel very free to check out our very attractive donations page. 100% of all those donations go towards production costs, which these days consists of the various subscriptions that allow for these readings to happen. If you would like to read with us in future projects, just send us an email at casting@zenithplayers.com and we will get you on board. Join us this Saturday for our 50th live reading, King Lear. For now, please relax and enjoy. Tara Lynn Clifford narrating, Lorraine Ruth Rosenberg as Harriet Smith, Matthew Kisher as Mr. Knightley, Noah Stanzione as Mr. Woodhouse, Justine D'Souza as Isabella, Allison Russell as Mrs. Weston, Steve Anderson as Mr. Weston, Dan Kostelik as Frank Churchill, Brian J. Applegate as Mr. Cole, Claire Bohenick as Miss Bates, Gillian Petrie as Jane Fairfax, Garrett Hicks as Mr. Robert Martin, Erica Vieira as Miss Elizabeth Martin, Andrew Gellos as Mr. Elton, Mira Singer as Mrs. Elton, and Shakira Searle as
Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her.
How am I to bear it when she is gone? Truly, she's only going half a mile from us, but great is the difference between a Mrs. Weston, half a mile from us, and a Miss Taylor in the house.
Poor Miss Taylor. I wish she were here again. What a pity it is Mr. Weston ever thought of her.
I cannot agree with you, Papa. You know I cannot. Mr. Weston is such a good-humoured, pleasant, excellent man, that he thoroughly deserves a good wife. And you would not have had Miss Taylor live with us forever, and bear all of my odd humours, when she might have had a house of her own.
A house of her own? But where's the advantage of a house of her own? This is 3 times as large. And you've never had any odd humours, my dear. Poor Miss Taylor.
Poor Miss Taylor?
Mr. Knightley. It is very good of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to call upon us. I'm afraid you must have had a shocking walk.
Not at all, sir. It is a beautiful moonlight night, and so mild that I must draw back from your great fire. But I have not wished you joy. Being pretty well aware of what sort of joy you must both be feeling, I have been in no hurry with my congratulations, but I hope it all went off tolerably well. How did you all behave? Who cried the most?
Oh, poor Miss Taylor. 'Tis a sad business.
Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse. If you please, but I cannot possibly say poor Miss Taylor. I have a great regard for you and Emma, but when it comes to the question of dependence or independence, at any rate, it must be better to have only one to please than 2.
Especially when one of those 2 is such a fanciful, troublesome creature. That is what you have in your head, I know, and what you would certainly say if my father were not by.
I believe it is very true, my dear, indeed. I'm afraid I'm sometimes very fanciful and troublesome.
My dearest papa, you do not think that I could mean you, or suppose Mr. Knightley to mean you. What a horrible idea. Oh, no, I only meant myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me, you know. In a joke. It is all a joke. We always say what we like to one another.
Dear Emma bears everything so well, but Mr. Knightley, she's really very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor, and I'm sure she will miss her more than she thinks for.
It is impossible that Emma should not miss such a companion, but every friend of Miss Taylor must be glad to have her so happily married.
And you have forgotten one matter of joy to me, and a very considerable one, that I made the match myself. I made the match, 4 years ago. And to have it take place and be proved in the right, when so many people said Mr. Weston would never marry again, may comfort me for anything.
Emma, my dear, I wish you would not make matches or foretell things, for whatever you say always comes to pass. Pray do not make any more matches.
I promise to make none for myself, Papa. But I must indeed for other people. It is the greatest amusement in the world. And after such success,
I do not understand what you mean by success. Success supposes endeavor. Your time has been properly and delicately spent. If you have been endeavoring for the last 4 years to bring about this marriage, a worthy employment of a young lady's mind. But if, which I rather imagine, you making the match, as you call it, means only you're planning it, you're saying to yourself one idle day, I think it would be a very good thing for Miss Taylor if Mr. Weston were to marry her, and saying it again to yourself every now and then afterwards. Why do you talk of success? Where is your merit? What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, and that is all that can be said.
And have you never known the pleasure and triumph of a lucky guess? I pity you. I thought you cleverer. For depend upon it, a lucky guess is never merely luck. There is always some talent in it. And as to my poor word success, which you quarrel with, I do not know that I am so entirely without any claim to it. You have drawn 2 pretty pictures, but I think there may be a third, a something between the do-nothing and the do-all. If I had not promoted Mr. Weston's visits here, and given many little encouragements, and smoothed many little matters, it might not have come to anything after all. I think you must know Hartfield enough to comprehend that.
Emma never thinks of herself if she can do good to others. But, my dear, pray do not make any more matches. They are silly things and break up one's family circle grievously.
Only one more, Papa. Only for Mr. Elton. Poor Mr. Elton. You like Mr. Elton, Papa. I must look about for a wife for him. There is nobody in Highbury who deserves him. And he has been here a whole year, and has fitted up his house so comfortably, that it would be a shame to have him single any longer. And I thought when he was joining their hands today, he looked so very much as if he would like to have the same kind of office done for him. I think very well of Mr. Elton, and this is the only way I have of doing him a service.
Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody. Somebody had placed her several years back at Mrs. Goddard's school, and somebody had lately raised her from the condition of scholar to that of parlour boarder. This was all that was generally known of her history. She had no visible friends, but what had been acquired at Highbury and was now just returned from a long visit in the country to some young ladies who had been at school there with her. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time in inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often, and as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other.
The misfortune of your birth, Harriet, ought to make you particularly careful as to your associates. There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter. You must support your claim to that station by everything within your power, or there will be plenty of people who would take pleasure in degrading you.
Yes, to be sure, I suppose there are, but while I visit at Hartfield, and you are so kind to me, Miss Woodhurst, I am not afraid what anybody can do. And the Martins of Abbey Mill Farm, they were ever so kind to me this summer. When I went away, Mrs. Martin was so very kind to send Miss Goddard a beautiful goose, the finest goose Mrs. Goddard had ever seen, she said.
The Martins and other yeomanry are of precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or 2 lower might interest me. If they were very poor, I might hope to be useful to them in some way. But a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore very much above my notice as he is below it.
Mr. Robert Martin went 3 miles one day to bring me walnuts because he knew how fond I was of them. He had a shepherd's son into the parlour one night and proposed to sing to me. I am very fond of singing.
I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man. I know indeed that he is so, and as such wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be?
He was 24, the 8th of last July, and my birthday is the 23rd, just a fortnight and a day's different, which is very odd.
Only 24. That is too young to settle. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of young woman in the same rank as his own, with a little money, it might be very desirable.
6 years hence, dear Miss Woodhouse, he would be 30 years old.
They met Mr. Martin the very next day as they were walking on the Donwell Road. He was on foot, and after looking very respectfully at her, looked with most unfeigned satisfaction at her companion. Emma was not sorry to have such an opportunity of survey, and walking a few yards forward while they talked together soon made her quick eye sufficiently acquainted with Mr. Robert Martin. His appearance was very neat, and he looked like a sensible young man, but his person had no other advantage. And when he came to be contrasted with gentlemen, she thought he must lose all the ground he had gained in Harriet's inclination. Harriet was not insensible of manner. She had voluntarily noticed her father's gentleness with admiration as well as wonder. Mr. Martin looked as if he did not know what manner was. They remained but a few minutes together, as Miss Woodhouse must not be kept waiting, and Harriet then came running to her with a smiling face and in a flutter of spirits, which Miss Woodhouse hoped very soon to compose.
Only think of our happening to meet him. Well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him?
I had no right to expect much, and they did not expect much. But I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility.
To be sure, he's not so genteel as to a real gentleman.
I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some such very real gentleman, that you must yourself be struck with the difference in Mr. Martin. At Hartfield, you should have had very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men. I should be surprised if, after seeing them, you could be in company with Mr. Martin again without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature, and rather wondering at yourself for ever having thought him at all agreeable before. Do you not begin to feel that now?
Certainly, he is not like Mr. Knightley. He has not such fine air and way of walking as Mr. Knightley. I see the difference plain enough, but Mr. Knightley is so very fine a man.
I think a young man might be very safely recommended to take Mr. Elton as a model. Mr. Elton is good-humoured, cheerful, obliging, and gentle. He seems to me to be growing particularly gentle of late. I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, by additional softness, but it strikes me that his manners are softer than they used to be. If he means anything, it must be to please you. Did I not tell you of what he said the other day?
She then repeated some warm personal praise which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did full justice to, and Harriet blushed and smiled.
I have always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable.
You have given Miss Smith all that she required. You have made her graceful and easy. She was a beautiful creature when she came to you, but in my opinion, the attractions you have added are infinitely superior to what she received from nature.
I am glad that you think I have been useful to her, but Harriet only wanted drawing out and receiving a very, very few hints. She had all the natural grace of sweetness of temper and artlessness in herself. I have done very little.
If it were admissible to contradict a lady.
I have perhaps given her a little more decision of character, have taught her to think on points which had not fallen in her way before. Did you ever have your likeness taken, Harriet? Did you ever sit for your picture?
Oh dear, no, never.
What an exquisite possession a good picture of her would be. I would give any money for it. I almost long to attempt her likeness myself. You do not know it, I dare say, but 2 or 3 years ago I had a great passion for taking likenesses, and attempted several of my friends, and was thought to have a tolerable eye in general. But from one cause to another I gave it up in disgust. But really, I could almost venture, If Harriet were to sit to me, it would be such a delight to have her picture.
Let me entreat you. It would indeed be a delight. Let me entreat you, Miss Woodhouse, to exercise so charming a talent in favor of your friend.
The sitting began, and Harriet, smiling and blushing and afraid of not keeping her attitude and countenance, presented a very sweet mixture of youthful expression to the steady eyes of the artist. But there was no doing anything with Mr. Elton fidgeting behind her and watching every touch. Everybody who saw the painting was pleased, but Mr. Elton was in continual raptures and defended it through every criticism.
You've made her too tall, Emma.
Oh, no, no, certainly not too tall. Not in the least too tall. Consider she is sitting down, which naturally presents a different, which in short gives exactly the idea. And the proportions must be preserved, you know. Proportions foreshortening. Oh, no. It gives one exactly the idea of such a height as Miss Smith's. Exactly so indeed.
It is very pretty. You consider she's sitting down, which naturally presents a different, which in short gives exactly the idea. And the proportions must be preserved, you know, proportions foreshortening. Oh no, it gives one exactly the idea of such height as this. Exactly so indeed.
But my dear Papa, it is supposed to be summer. A warm day in summer. Look at the tree.
But it is never safe to sit out of doors, my dear.
You, sir, may say anything, but I must confess that I regard it as a most happy thought. The placing of Miss Smith out of doors, and the tree is touched with such inimitable spirit. Any other situation might have been much less in character. The naivete of Miss Smith's manners, and altogether, oh, it is most admirable. I cannot keep my eyes from it. I never saw such a likeness.
The next thing wanted is to get the picture framed, and here are a few difficulties.
Might I be trusted with the commission? What infinite pleasure should I have of executing it? I can ride to London at any time. It is impossible to say how much I should be gratified by being employed on such an errand. What a precious likeness.
I do not know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Whetson, of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it's a bad thing.
A bad thing? Do you really think it a bad thing? Why so?
Miss Smith knows nothing herself and looks upon Emma as knowing everything. Her ignorance is hourly flattered.
But as Emma wants to see her better informed, it will be an inducement to her to read more herself. They will read together. She means it, I know.
Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. I have seen a great many lists of her drawings up at various times of books that she meant to read regularly through, and very good lists they were, very well chosen and very neatly arranged, sometimes alphabetically, and sometimes by some other rule. The list she drew up when only 14, I remember thinking it did her judgment so much credit that I preserved it in some time, and I dare say she may have made out a very good list now. But I have done with expecting any course of steady reading from Emma. She never would submit to anything requiring industry and patience.
I know that you all love her really too well to be unjust or unkind, but excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if I take the liberty. I consider myself of having somewhat of the privilege of speech that Emma's mother might have had, the liberty of hinting that I do not think any possible good can arise from Harriet Smith's intimacy being made a matter of much discussion among you. Supposing any little inconvenience may be apprehended from the intimacy, it cannot be expected that Emma, accountable to nobody but her father, who perfectly approved the acquaintance, should put an end to it, so long as it is a source of pleasure to herself.
I will not raise any outcry. I will keep my ill humor to myself. I have a very sincere interest in Emma. Isabella does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest, perhaps hardly so great. There is an anxiety, a curiosity in what one feels for Emma. I wonder what will become of her.
So do I, very much.
She always declares she will never marry, which, of course, means just nothing at all. But I have no idea that I had no idea that she has yet ever seen a man she cared for. It would not be a bad thing for her to be very much in love with a proper object. I should like to see Emma in love, and in some doubt of a return. It would do her good.
Miss Woodhouse, a letter from Mr. Martin.
Was not sorry to be pressed. She read and was surprised. The style of the letter was much above her expectation. There were not merely no grammatical errors, but as a composition, it would not have disgraced a gentleman. The language, though plain, was strong and unaffected, and the sentiments it conveyed very much to the credit of the writer. It was short, but expressed good sense, warm attachment, liberality, propriety, even delicacy of feeling.
Mr. Martin, he's offered me his hand. He writes as if he really loves me very much. Will you read the letter?
It is a very good letter. So good, I think one of his sisters must have helped him.
But what shall I say?
But what are you in doubt of? You must answer it, of course, and speedily.
Yes, but what shall I say?
Oh, no. The letter had much better be all your own. You will express yourself very properly, I'm sure. You need not to be prompted to write with the appearance of sorrow for his disappointment.
You think I ought to refuse him?
I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him.
You think I'd better say no?
Not for the world would I advise you either way. You must be the best judge of your own happiness.
I have now quite demanded and really almost made up my mind to refuse, Mr. Martin. You think I am right?
Refused? Then she is greater simpleton than I ever believed her. Harriet Smith refused Robert Martin. I hope you are mistaken.
I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer.
You saw her answer? You wrote her answer too? Emma, this is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him.
And if I did, which I am far from allowing, I should not feel that I had done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal.
Not Harriet's equal. No, he is not her equal indeed, for he is as much her superior in sense as in situation. Emma, your infatuation about that girl blinds you. What are Harriet Smith's claims, either of birth, nature, or education, to any connection higher than Robert Martin? She is the natural daughter of nobody knows whom.
There can be scarcely a doubt that her father is a gentleman, and a gentleman of fortune.
With probably no settled provision at all, and certainly no respectable relations.
Her allowance is very liberal. Nothing has been grudged for her improvement.
She is known only as a parlor boarder at a common school.
She is pretty and she is good-tempered.
And that is all.
That is all? They are not trivial recommendations to the world in general, for she is, in fact, a beautiful girl, and must be thought so by 99 people out of 100, until it appears that men are very much more philosophic on the subject of beauty than they are generally supposed, till they do fall in love with well-informed minds instead of handsome faces. A girl with such loveliness as Harriet has a certainty of being admired and sought after, of having the power of choosing from among many, consequently a claim to be nice. Her good nature, too, is not so very slight a claim, comprehending as it does, real through sweetness of temper and manner, a very humble opinion of herself, and a great readiness to be pleased with other people. I am very much mistaken if your sex in general would not think such beauty and such temper the highest claims a woman could possess.
Upon my word, Emma, to hear you abusing the reason you have is almost enough to make me think so too. Better to be without sense altogether than to misapply it as you do. Men of sense do not want silly wives, and more prudent men would be afraid of the inconvenience and disgrace that they might be involved in when the mystery of her parentage came to be revealed. Let her marry Robert Martin, and she is safe and respectable forever. But if you teach her to expect to marry greatly nobody within her reach, will you ever be good enough for her? Your plans for Harriet are best known only to yourself. But as you make no secret of your love of matchmaking, it is fair to suppose that the plans you have, and as a friend, I shall just hint to you that if Elton is the man that I think, it will be your labor in vain. He knows that he is a very handsome young man and a great favorite wherever he goes, but from his general way of talking when there are only men present, I am convinced that he does not mean to throw himself away.
If I had had my heart set on Mr. Elton's marrying Harriet, it would have been very kind to open my eyes. But at present, I only want to keep Harriet to myself. I have done with matchmaking indeed.
When Emma's elder sister Isabella came to call, Mr. Knightley was to dine with them, rather against the inclination of Mr. Woodhouse, who did not like that anyone should share with him in Isabella's first day. Emma's sense of right, however, had decided it, and besides the consideration of what was due to each brother, she had particular pleasure from the circumstance of the late disagreement between Mr. Knightley and herself in procuring him the proper invitation. She hoped they might now become friends again. She thought it was time to make up. Making up indeed would not do. She certainly had not been in the wrong, and he would never own that he had. Emma felt they were friends again, and the conviction giving her at first great satisfaction, and then a little sauciness, she could not help saying, as he was admiring the baby.
What a comfort it is that we think alike about our nephews and nieces. As to men and women, our opinions are sometimes very different, but with regard to these children, I observe we never disagree.
If you were as much guided by nature in your estimate of men and women, and a little under the power of fancy and women your dealings with them, as you are where these children are concerned, we might always think alike.
To be sure, our discordancies must always arise from my being in the wrong.
Yes, and reason good. I was 16 years old when you were born.
A material difference, then, and no doubt you were very much my superior in judgment at that period of our lives. But does not the lapse of 21 years bring our understandings a good deal nearer?
Yes, a good deal nearer.
But still not near enough to give me a chance of being right if we think differently.
Come, my dear Emma, let us be friends, and say no more about it.
Mr. Knightley, a word or two more, and I have done. As far as my good intentions went, we were both right, and I must say that no effects on my side of the argument have yet proved wrong. I only want to know that Mr. Martin is not very, very bitterly disappointed.
A man cannot be more so.
I am indeed very sorry.
My poor dear Isabella, how long it is, how terribly long since you were here, and how tired you must be after your journey. 'Twas an awkward business, my dear, your spending the autumn at the sea instead of coming here. I never had much opinion of the sea air.
The physician most strenuously recommended it, or we should not have gone. He recommended it for all the children, but particularly for the weakness in little Bella's throat, both sea air and bathing. Sea air and sea bathing.
Sea is rarely of use to anybody. I'm sure it has killed me once.
Come, come, I must beg you not to talk of the sea. It makes me envious and miserable. I who have never seen it. Talk of the sea is prohibited, if you please.
In general, their evenings were less engaged with friends than their mornings, but one complete dinner engagement, and out of the house too, there was no avoiding, though at Christmas. Mr. Weston would take no denial. They must all dine at Randall's one day. Even Mr. Woodhouse was persuaded to think it a possible thing in preference to a division of the party. The evening before this great event, for it was a very great event that Mr. Woodhouse should dine out on the 24th of December, had been spent by Harriet at Hartfield, and she had gone home so much indisposed with the cold that, but for her own earnest wish of being nursed by Mrs. Goddard, Emma could not have allowed her to leave the house. Emma called on her the next day and found her doom already signed with regard to the Randalls. She was very feverish and had a bad sore throat. Mrs. Goddard was full of care and affection. Mr. Perry was talked of, and Harriet herself was too ill and low to resist the authority which excluded her from the delightful engagement, though she could not speak of her loss without many tears.
How's poor Miss Smith?
Oh, Harriet is no better, I'm afraid.
Such a sad loss to our party today.
Miss Smith has sent her apologies.
She will be missed every moment. Frank has been detained at Tenscombe, I'm sorry to say. I had a letter from him just this morning.
Another fine, flourishing letter for the professions and falsehoods.
Your feelings are singular. His letters seem to satisfy everybody else.
I suspect they do not satisfy Mrs. Wetson. Were she a person of consequence herself, he would have come by now, I dare say.
You seem determined to think ill of him.
I should be as ready to acknowledge his merits as any other man, but I hear of none except that he is well grown and good looking.
Well, if he has nothing else to recommend him, he shall be a treasure at Highbury. We do not often look upon fine young men, cannot ask for all the virtues into the bargain.
You will excuse my being so much overpowered.
We are both prejudiced, you against, I for him, and we shall have no chance of agreeing until he is really here.
Prejudiced? I'm not prejudiced.
But I very much am, and without at all being ashamed of it.
You must know that we are by no means so sure of seeing Mr. Frank Churchill. In my opinion, as his father thinks, it depends entirely upon his aunt's spirits and pleasure. In short, upon her temper. To you, to my two daughters, I may venture on the truth. Mrs. Churchill rules at Enscombe, and is a very odd-tempered woman, and his coming now depends upon her being willing to spare him.
Oh, Mrs. Churchill. Everybody knows Mrs. Churchill, and I am sure I never think of that poor young man without the greatest compassion. To be constantly living with an ill-tempered person must be dreadful. It is what we happily have never known anything of, but it must be a life of misery. What a blessing that she never had any children. Poor little creatures, how unhappy she would have made them. There is jealousy. She is jealous even of his regard for his father.
But she is so very fond of her nephew. He is her particular favourite.
My dearest Emma, do not pretend, with your sweet temper, to understand a bad one, or to lay down rules for it. You must let it go its own way. I have no doubt of his having, at times, considerable influence, but it may be perfectly impossible for him to know beforehand when it will be.
I shall not be satisfied unless he comes.
He may have a great deal of influence on some points, and on others very little. And among those on which she is beyond his reach, that is too likely may be this very circumstance of his coming away from them to visit us.
Dinner over, the carriage came, and Emma found, on being escorted and followed into the second carriage by Mr. Elton, that the door was to be lawfully shut on them. To restrain him as much as might be, by her own manner, she was immediately preparing to speak with exquisite calmness and gravity of the weather and the night. But scarcely had she begun, scarcely had they passed the sweep gate and joined the other carriage, then she found her subject cut up, her hands seized, her attention demanded, and Mr. Elton actually making violent love to her.
I must avail myself of this precious opportunity to declare sentiments which you must already know. My
Mr. Elton,
ardent
please,
attachment.
you've drunk too much wine. Mr. Elton, you forget yourself.
I am ready to die if you refuse me.
You take me for my friend. Any message you have to Miss Smith, I shall be happy to deliver.
For Miss Smith? A message for Miss Smith? I have never thought of Miss Smith in the whole course of my existence. Never paid any attentions as but your friend. Never cared whether she was dead or alive, but as your friend. Oh, Miss Woodhouse. Who can think of Miss Smith when Miss Woodhouse is near? Everything I have said or done for many weeks has been with the sole view of making my adoration to yourself. Charming Miss Woodhouse, allow me to interrupt this interesting silence. It confesses you have long understood me.
No, sir. It confesses no such thing. Nothing could be further from my wishes. Your pursuit of Harriet has given me great pleasure, and I've been very earnestly wishing you success.
Miss Smith is a very good sort of girl, and no doubt there are men who might not object. Everybody has their level. Madam, my visits to Hartfield have been for yourself only, and the encouragement I received...
Encouragement? I gave you encouragement. You are entirely mistaken, sir. I have no thoughts of matrimony at present.
He was too angry to say another word, and in this state of swelling resentment and mutually deep mortification, they had to continue together a few minutes longer, without knowing the carriage turned into Vicarage Lane, or when it stopped, they found themselves all at once at the door of his house, and he was out before another syllable passed, and she was then conveyed to Hartfield. She went to Mrs. Goddard's accordingly the very next day to undergo the necessary penance of communication, and a severe one it was. The confession completely renewed her first shame, and the sight of Harriet's tears made her think that she would never be in charity with herself again.
Miss Woodhouse! Miss Woodhouse, he never loved me. He loves you.
He sought only to aggrandize and enrich himself.
Yes.
Harriet, you might never have thought of him but for me. I assured you of his attachments. I contrived his visits.
I do not blame you, Miss Woodhouse. I could never have deserved him, and not to be so partial and kind a friend as you could ever have thought possible. It's silly, really.
Harriet, let us strive to occupy ourselves with books and conversation. Come, it will help us to drive Mr. Elton from our thoughts.
Jane Fairfax was an orphan, the only child of Mrs. Bates' youngest daughter. She had fallen into good hands, known nothing but kindness from her adopted parents, and been given an excellent education. The plan was that she should be brought up for educating others. The very few £100 which she inherited from her father making independence impossible.
Heaven forbid! At least that I should ever bore people half as much as about all the Knightleys together, as she does about Jane Fairfax. One is sick of the very name of Jane Fairfax. Every letter from her is read 40 times over. Her compliments to all friends go round and round again. And if she does but send her aunt the pattern of a stomacher, or knit a pair of garters for her grandmother, one hears of nothing else for a month. I wish Jane Fairfax very well, but she tires me to death.
Jane and Mr. Frank Churchill had been at Weymouth at the same time. It was known that they were little acquainted, but not a syllable of real information could Emma procure as to what he truly was.
We are very little acquainted.
Frank Churchill was at Weymouth in October. But you must describe him. Is he handsome?
I believe he is reckoned a very fine young man.
Is he agreeable?
I believe he is generally thought so.
Did he appear a sensible young man? A man of information?
At a watering place or in a common London acquaintance, it is difficult to decide on such points. Manners are all that can safely be judged of. Under a much longer knowledge than we have yet to have had Mr. Churchill, I believe everybody fond of his manners is pleasing.
Emma could not forgive her. Lost in thought while walking with Harriet, Emma recalled a time when Mr. Knightley observed,
You are not often deficient. You make it very plain you do not like Miss Fairfax.
Everybody supposes that we must be so fond of each other because we are the same age. Ever since I can remember, I have been told that I could find no better companion than Jane Fairfax, she who is so accomplished and so superior.
She is certainly accomplished. Perhaps the accomplished young woman you wish to be thought yourself.
I could never get acquainted with her. I do not know how it is, but there is such coldness and reserve, such apparent indifference whether she pleases or not. And then her aunt is such an eternal talker.
I must go.
Harriet,
Oh,
we have missed you. Our mother's been asking for you. Will you come and visit us again?
of course. Good day, Miss Martin. Mr. Martin?
Miss Smith, the near way is quite flooded. You would do better going by Mr. Cole's stables. The ground is higher there.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
You behaved extremely well, and it is over. As a first meeting, it cannot occur again. You must stay no longer than a quarter of an hour, and allow no dangerous recurrences to the past.
The next morning brought Mr. Frank Churchill. He came with Mrs. Weston, to whom and to Highbury he seemed to take very cordially. He had been sitting with her, it appeared, most companionably at home, till her usual hour of exercise, and on being desired to choose their walk, immediately fixed on Highbury.
My son, Mr. Frank Churchill, Miss Emma Woodhouse.
Miss Woodhouse.
He has caught us quite by surprise.
It is a great pleasure where one can indulge in it, though there are not many houses that I should presume on so far, but in coming home I felt might do anything. I'm sorry, what was that, Miss Woodhouse? Could you repeat yourself? Maybe by hitting a button.
I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Jane Fairfax. Did you meet often at Weymouth?
Pray, let us go into Fords that I may prove myself to belong to this place, to be a true citizen of Highbury. I must buy something at Fords. It will be taking out my freedom. I dare say they sell gloves.
Oh yes, gloves and everything. I do admire your patriotism.
It went in, and the sleek, well-tied parcels of men's beavers and York tan were brought down and displayed on the counter.
But I beg your pardon, Miss Woodhouse. You were speaking to me. You were saying something at the very moment of this burst of my amor patriae. Do not let me lose it. I assure you the utmost stretch of public fame would not make amends for the loss of any happiness in private life.
I merely asked whether you had known much of Miss Fairfax and her party at Weymouth.
Oh, and now that I understand the question, I must pronounce it to be a very unfair one. It is always the lady's right to decide on the degree of acquaintance. Miss Fairfax must already have given her account. I shall not commit myself by claiming more than she may choose to allow.
Upon my word, you answer as discreetly as she could do herself. But her account of everything leaves so much to be guessed. She is so very reserved, so very unwilling to give the least information about anybody, that I really think you may say what you like of your acquaintance with her.
I only know what is generally known, that she is poor and of no consequence. Here's where you have your balls, I suppose.
I am afraid Highbury may yet disappoint you, Mr. Churchill. We have not society enough for dancing.
Ah, but an inn of this size must have a ballroom, and where there is a ballroom, there can be a ball. We cannot do without dancing. Instances have been known of young people passing many, many months successively without being at any ball of any description, no material injury accrue either to body or mind. But when a beginning is made, when the felicities of rapid motion have once been, though slightly felt, it must be a very heavy set that does not ask for more. I danced once at Highbury. I long to dance again.
It is very dirty inside.
My dear, you are too particular. What does all that signify? You will see nothing of it by candlelight. It will be as clean as Randall's by candlelight. We never see anything of it on our club nights.
Yes, and when we do, may I hope for the honor of your hand for the first two dances?
The Coles are to hold a supper party in Frank's honor. Perhaps there will be dancing there.
So, Emma Woodhouse deigned to accept an invitation from the merchant, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Churchill will soon return to Yorkshire. We must make the most of every opportunity until he does.
We must.
He's in Highbury only 2 weeks.
And yet he's gone off to London just to get his haircut.
Certainly no harm in his...
Traveling 16 miles.
Twice over on such an errand.
Just the trifling, silly fellow I took him for.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Churchill, welcome. A grand estate in Scone Bay. In Scone, your estate. In Scone, soon to inherit, of course. Soon to inherit in Scone Bay. Not too soon. I trust your Uncle Churchill is in good health.
Excellent health. Excuse me.
And have you heard? A pianoforte, very elegant, delivered to Miss Fairfax this very morning.
I never saw so fine an instrument.
Mr. Cole.
Mrs. Weston. Miss Woodhouse.
Mr. Cole.
A pianoforte. Very elegant. And with no return address. No return address. There was no return address!
Jane herself is at quite a loss, quite bewildered to think who could have sent it.
Why do you smile?
Nay, why do you?
I suppose I smile for pleasure at Miss Fairfax's adopted father being so rich and so liberal. It is a handsome present.
Very.
I rather wonder why it was never made before.
Perhaps Miss Fairfax has never been staying here so long before.
Or that he did not give her use of his own instrument, which must now be shut up in London untouched by anybody.
That is a grand pianoforte, and he might think it too large for Miss Bates' house.
You may say what you choose, but your countenance testifies that your thoughts on the subject are very much like mine.
If her adopted father is not the giver, who can be?
What do you say to Mrs. Dixon?
Mrs. Dixon? Ooh, very true indeed. I had not thought of Mrs. Dixon. She must know as well as her father how acceptable an instrument would be. And perhaps the mode of it, the mystery, the surprise, is more like a young woman's scheme than an elderly man's. It is Mrs. Dixon, I dare say. I knew that your suspicions would guide mine.
Extend your suspicions to Mr. Dixon.
Mr. Dixon?
He saved her life. Did you hear of it? A water party, and by some accident she was falling overboard. He caught her.
What do you say to this, Emma? I have made a match between Mr. Knightley and Jane Fairfax.
Mr. Knightley and Jane Fairfax?
Well, the pianoforte has been sent to her by somebody, and she has always been a favorite with him. Tonight, he sent his carriage for her as a courtesy and walked himself. Was that not gallant?
Soon enough, Mr. Elton returned with his wife.
His wife?
He's married. Miss Augusta Hawkins, now Mrs. Elton.
It cannot be a long acquaintance. He's only been gone 4 weeks. Well, to tea then. Harriet would have been a better match.
My wife, Mrs. Augusta Elton.
This house is very like my brother, Mr. Suckling's seat at Maple Grove. Very like. I'm quite struck by the likeness. That room is the very shape and size of the morning room at Maple Grove, my sister's favourite room. Is it not astonishingly like, dear husband?
Very like.
I really could almost fancy myself at Maple Grove. And the staircase, you know, as I came in, I observed how very like the staircase is, placed in exactly the same part of the house. I assure you, Miss Woodhouse, it is very delightful to me to be reminded of a place I am so extremely partial to as Maple Grove.
A most impressive residence.
Whenever you are as transplanted as me, Miss Woodhouse, you will understand how very delightful it is to meet with anything at all that reminds one of what one has left behind. We have been calling it Randalls. What pleasant people the Westons seem to be. And who should call in while we were there? Knightley himself. Of course, as so particular a friend of Mr. E.'s, I had great curiosity to meet him. My friend Knightley had been so often mentioned that I really was impatient to see him, and I must do my capo sposo the justice to say that he need not at all be ashamed of his friend.
Insufferable woman. Knightley. I could not believe it. Knightley. Never met him before in her life, and she calls him Knightley. And to discover that he is a gentleman. Upstart, vulgar being, with her Mr. E. and her caro sposo, and her resources, and all her airs of pert pretension and underbred finery. Actually to discover that Mr. Knightley is a gentleman. I doubt whether he will return the compliment and discover her to be a lady.
One good thing was immediately brought to a certainty, the ball at the Crown. It had not been forgotten before, but it had been soon acknowledged vain to attempt to fix a day. Now, however, it was absolutely to be. Every preparation was resumed, and very soon after the Churchills had removed to Richmond and induced them to name as early a day as possible. Mr. Weston's ball was to be a real thing. A very few tomorrows stood between the young people of Highbury and happiness. The day approached, the day arrived, and after a morning of some anxious watching, Frank Churchill, in all the certainty of his own self, reached Randalls before dinner, and everything was safe.
Oh, this is brilliant indeed. This is admirable. Excellently contrived, upon my word. Nothing wanting. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, you must really have had Aladdin's lamp. This is meeting quite in fairyland. Such a transformation. Now, where shall we sit? Where shall we sit? Oh, now, anywhere where Jane is not in a draught. How do you like Jane's hair? She did it all herself. Too wonderful. No hairdresser from London, I think, could do a fancier style.
Emma, it has just occurred to us that Mrs. Elton will expect to be asked to begin the ball, and she will surely think Frank ought to ask her.
Frank cannot break his promise to you. He's promised you the first 2 dances. So I shall ask Mrs. Elton. The ball is Frank's honor, but it's my design. I shall ask her.
You must submit to stand second. A bride must be in first in company. It is almost to make me think of marrying.
Oh, must I go first? I really am ashamed to always be leading the way.
Gentlemen?
You have been much missed in Highbury.
Have I?
How is your aunt?
Most reluctant to release me.
Do you not dance, Mr. Elton?
Most readily, Miss Weston, if you will dance with me.
Oh.
Well, perhaps...
There is a young lady disengaged whom I should be very glad to see dancing. Miss Harriet Smith.
Miss Harriet Smith. If I were not an old married man. But my dancing days are over. Mrs. Weston, you will excuse me.
Will you dance, Miss Smith?
thank you for your kindness to Harriet.
He was unpardonably rude, and he aimed at wounding more than Harriet.
I do own myself to have been completely mistaken in Mr. Elton. There is a littleness about him which you discovered and I did not, and I was fully convinced of his being in love with Harriet.
And in return for your acknowledging so much, I will do you the justice to say that you would have chosen for him better than he has chosen for himself. Harriet Smith has some first-rate qualities which Mrs. Elton is totally without. She does you credit, Emma, as you do her.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, come, set your companions an example. Everybody is lazy, everyone is asleep. We must dance another set.
I am ready whenever I am wanted.
With whom will you dance?
With you, if you will ask me.
Will you?
Indeed I will. You have shown that you can dance, and you know we are not really so much brother and sister as to make it all improper.
No, indeed.
A young lady who faints must be recovered. Questions must be answered and surprises be explained. Such events are very interesting, but the suspense of them cannot last long. A few minutes made Emma acquainted with the whole. She was just turning to the house with spirits freshened up for how very happy a summer must be before her, when the great iron sweep gate opened and two persons entered, whom she had never less expected to see together. Frank Churchill, with Harriet leaning on his arm. Actually, Harriet? A moment sufficed to convince her that something was extraordinary had happened. Harriet looked white and frightened, and he was trying to cheer her. The iron gates and the front door were not 20 yards asunder. They were all three soon in the hall, and Harriet, immediately sinking into a chair, fainted away.
Mr. Churchill! Harriet, what has happened?
She was set upon by some fiends as she was coming home. When she attempted to escape, she fell ill. She had a cramp.
Too much dancing.
Well, is she hurt?
I didn't see. I arrived moments after and brought her here. I can think of no other place.
To the drawing room.
Was it on account of the scissors?
The scissors?
The scissors?
I borrowed a pair of scissors from Miss Bates. I was halfway home when I made the recollection and so doubled back. What is your purpose here?
My carriage, my horse, my horse threw a shoe.
You took your carriage to the ball?
Yes.
What might have become of me, Miss Woodhouse, if not for the scissors?
We must send for the doctor.
Mrs. Goddard should be assured of her safety.
Yes, and I shall rouse my father. We ought to let them know that there are such fiends in the neighborhood.
Yes, let us go at once.
Miss Woodhouse, I believe I am in love again. Believe me, I have not the presumption to support.
No, but the service he rendered you.
Service? The very recollection of it and all that I felt is coming to me. His noble look. Such a change in one moment, such a change from misery to perfect happiness.
It is very natural. It is natural and it is honourable. Yes, honourable, I think, to choose so well and so gratefully. But that it will be a fortunate preference is more than I can promise. I do not advise you to give way to it, Harriet. I do not by any means engage for its being returned. Consider what you are about. Perhaps it will be wisest in you to check your feelings while you can. At any rate, do not let them carry you far unless you are persuaded of his liking you. Be observant of him. Let his behaviour be the guide of your sensations. I give you this caution now because I shall never speak to you again on the subject. I am determined against all interference. Henceforward, I know nothing of the matter. Let no name ever pass our lips. We were very wrong before. We will be cautious now. He is your superior, no doubt, and there do seem to be objections and obstacles of a very serious nature, but yet, Harriet, more wonderful things have taken place. There have been matches of greater disparity, but take care of yourself. I would not have you too sanguine, though, however it may end, be assured of your raising your thoughts to him. It is a mark of good taste, which I shall always know how to value.
Harriet kissed her hand in silent and submissive gratitude. Emma was very decided in thinking such an attachment no bad thing for her friend. Its tendency would be to raise and refine her mind, and it must be saving her from the danger of degradation.
What is this I hear, dear Jane, about your going to the post office in the rain last week? Why, you sad girl, why would you do such a thing? I will not allow you to do such a thing again. I shall speak to Mr. E., the man who fetches our letters. One of our men, I forget his name, shall inquire for yours too. Do you suppose Mr. Knightley might extend us all an invitation to the Abbey, Miss Woodhouse? I love to explore great houses, and I fear I have long exhausted Highbury.
I'm afraid Mr. Knightley's concerns are all for his tenants, and none for his house, Mrs. Elton. His ballrooms and picture galleries are quite shut up.
I should be very glad to open Donwell for your exploration, Mrs. Elton. The welcome is long overdue.
I should like that of all things. Name your day and I will come.
I cannot name a day until I have spoken to some others whom I would wish to form the party.
Oh, leave that to me. It is my party. I will invite your guests.
I hope you will bring Elton, but I will not trouble you to give any other invitations.
Oh, well, now you are looking very sly. But consider, you need not be afraid of delegating power to me. Married women, you know, may be safely authorized.
There is but one married woman in all the world whom I can ever allow to invite what guests she pleases to Donwell.
Mrs. Weston, I suppose.
No, Mrs. Knightley. And, till she is in being, I will manage such matters myself.
They had a very fine day for Donwell. The Eltons walked together. Mr. Knightley took charge of Miss Bates and Jane, and Emma and Harriet belonged to Frank Churchill. Before the second looking over was begun, however, Emma walked into the hall for the sake of a few moments' free observation of the entrance and ground plot of the house, and was hardly there when Jane Fairfax appeared, coming quickly in from the garden, and with a look of escape. Little expecting to meet Miss Woodhouse so soon, there was a start at first, but Miss Woodhouse was the very person she was in quest of.
Will you be so kind when I am missed to say that I am gone home?
If you wish it. But you are not going to walk back to Highbury alone. You are fatigued already.
I am fatigued, but it is not the sort of fatigue. Quick walking will refresh me. Miss Woodhouse, we all know at times what it is to be wearied in spirits. Mine, I confess, are exhausted. The greatest kindness you can show me will be to let me have my own way and only say that I am gone when it is necessary.
Have I missed the party?
Not at all. We are exploring the house.
I feel a strong persuasion this morning that I shall soon be abroad. I ought to travel. I'm tired of doing nothing. I want to change. I'm serious, Miss Woodhouse. Whatever your penetrating eyes may fancy, I'm sick of England and would leave it tomorrow if I could.
You are sick of prosperity and indulgence. Cannot you invent a few hardships for yourself and be contented to stay?
You are quite mistaken. I do not look upon myself as either prosperous or indulged.
We're going to Box Hill tomorrow. It is still England, but it will be something for a young man so much in want of change.
Well, if you wish me to stay and join the party, I will. How much I am obliged to you for telling me to come today. I had quite determined to go away.
Yes, you were very cross.
Our companions are excessively stupid. What shall we do to rouse them? Any nonsense will serve. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse, who, wherever she is, presides, to say that she desires to know what you're all thinking of.
Is Miss Woodhouse sure that she would like to know what we are all thinking of?
Oh, No. Upon no account in the world. It is the very last thing I would stand the brunt of just now.
It is the sort of thing which I should not have thought myself privileged to inquire into as the chaperone of the party.
Very true, my love. Very true. But some ladies will say anything. Better to pass it off as a joke. Everyone knows what is due to you.
It will not do. They are most of them affronted. I will attack them with more address. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say that she waives her right of knowing what you may be thinking of and only requires something entertaining from each of you. She demands either one thing very clever, or two things moderately clever, or three things very dull indeed. And she engages to laugh heartily at them all.
Oh, very well then. I need not be uneasy. 3 things very dull indeed. That will do just for me. I shall be sure to say 3 dull things as soon as I open my mouth.
But, madam, there may be a difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited as to number. Only 3.
Well, to be sure, yes, I see what she means. I shall try to hold my tongue. I must make myself very disagreeable, or she would not have said such a thing to an old friend.
I like your plan. Agreed. I will do my best. I am making a conundrum. How will a conundrum reckon?
No, I'm afraid, sir, but we shall be indulgent, especially to anyone who leads the way.
What 2 letters of the alphabet are there that express perfection?
What 2 letters express perfection? I'm sure I do not know.
Well, I shall tell you. M and A. Emma.
This explains the sort of clever thing that is wanted, and Mr. Weston has done very well for himself. But he must have knocked up everybody else. Perfection should not have come quite so soon.
I protest I must be excused. I do not pretend to be a wit. I really must be allowed to judge when to speak and when to hold my tongue.
Shall we walk, Augusta?
With all my heart. I am really tired of exploring so long on one spot. Come, Jane, take my other arm.
Shall we join Mrs. Elton, ma'am?
If you please, my dear. With all my heart, I am quite ready. While waiting for the carriage, Emma found Mr. Knightley by her side. He looked around as if to see that no one were near.
Emma, I must once more speak to you as I have been used to do. A privilege rather endured, that allowed perhaps, but I must still use it. I cannot see you acting wrong without remonstrance. How could you be so unfeeling to Mrs. Bates? How could you be so insolent in your wit to a woman of her character? Emma, I had not thought it possible.
Nay, how could I help saying what I did? Nobody could have helped it. It was not so very bad. I dare say she did not understand me.
I assure you, she did. She felt your full meaning. She has talked of it since.
There is not a better creature in the world.
I wish you could have heard how she talked of it, with what candor and generosity.
You must allow that what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her.
They are blended in her, I acknowledge, and were she a woman of fortune, I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner, but she is poor. She has sunk from the comfort she was born to, and if she lived to an old age, she will probably sink more. She has seen you grow up from win her notice of you was an honor. To have you now in thoughtless spirits and the pride of the moment laugh at her and humble her, and before her niece and before others, many of whom are entirely guided by your treatment of her. It was badly done indeed.
In the warmth of true contrition, she would call upon Miss Bates the very next morning, and it should be the beginning, on her side, of a regular, equal, kindly discourse. She went early, that nothing might prevent her. It was not unlikely, she thought, that she might see Mr. Knightley in her way, or perhaps he might come in while she were paying her visit. She had no objection. She would not be ashamed of the appearance of the penitence, so justly and truly hers. Her eyes were towards Donwell as she walked, but she saw him not.
I'm afraid Jane is not very well. Dreadful headache. Writing all morning, such long letters. I said, my dear, you shall blind yourself.
I am so very sorry, Miss Bates. Please give Jane my good wishes.
So very kind you are to ask. But you are always kind, Miss Woodhouse.
There was no bearing such an always.
Where, may I ask, is Miss Fairfax going?
One morning, about 10 days after news of Mrs. Churchill's decease reached Highbury, Emma was called downstairs to Mr. Weston, who could not stay 5 minutes and wanted particularly to speak with her. He met her at the parlour door and, hardly asking her how she did, in the natural key of his voice, sunk it immediately to invite her to Randalls that very morning.
Mrs. Weston wants to see you. She must see you.
Is she unwell?
No, not at all. Only a little agitated. She would have ordered the carriage and come to you, but she must see you alone.
Certainly. This moment, if you please. It is impossible to refuse what you ask in such a way. But what can be the matter? Is she really not ill?
Don't ask me. I promised my wife to leave it all to her. She will break it to you better than I can. Do not be impatient, Emma. It will all come out too soon.
Break it to me? Good God! Mrs. Weston, tell me at once.
Emma, Frank was here this very morning on the most extraordinary errand. It is impossible to express our surprise. Frank and Jane Fairfax are engaged.
What?
Engaged since October, secretly engaged. It has hurt me, Emma, very much. It has hurt his father equally. Some part of his conduct we cannot excuse.
He sent the pianoforte.
He has confessed it.
Emma, you must know it was our darling wish.
Oh, no, not for me. I'm so very sorry, Harriet.
Oh, why should you console me? You do not think I care about Mr. Frank Churchill?
I am delighted to hear you speak so stoutly on the subject, but you do not mean to deny that there was a time, and not so very distant either, when you gave me reason to understand that you did care about him.
Him? Never. Dear Miss Woodhouse, how could you so mistake me?
Harriet, what do you mean?
I should have not thought it possible that you could have misunderstood me, but you told me the greater things had happened, that there had been matches of greater disparity. Those were your words, Miss Woodhouse.
Harriet, let us understand each other now without possibility of further mistake. Are you speaking of Mr. Knightley?
To be sure I am. I never could have an idea of anybody else, and so I thought you knew.
I could almost assert that you had named Mr. Frank Churchill. I am sure the service that Mr. Frank Churchill had rendered you in protecting you from the thieves.
No, I was thinking of a much more precious circumstance of Mr. Knightley coming and asking me to dance, when Mr. Elton would not stand up with me.
Good God. And have you any idea of Mr. Knightley's returning your affection?
I must say that I have. He has shown me sweetness and kindness, and at Donwell he took great pains to describe to me the particulars of the management of his tenant farm. we were interrupted, but before we were, he seemed almost to be asking me if my infections were engaged.
Yes, but is it possible that he might have been alluding to Mr. Martin? That he might have had Mr. Martin's interest in view?
You think of Mr. Knightley for yourself?
Harriet, I know that he is the last man who would intentionally give any woman the idea of his feeling more for her than he does. So, if you believe he loves you...
I refuse Mr. Martin because of you.
Harriet.
Emma and Mr. Knightley walked together. He was silent. She thought he was often looking at her and trying for a fuller view of her face than it suited her to give. And this belief produced another dread. Perhaps he wanted to speak to her of his attachments to Harriet. He might be watching for encouragement to begin. She could not feel equal to lead the way to any such subject. He must do it all himself, yet she could not bear the silence.
You have some news to hear, now you are come back, that will rather surprise you.
Have I? Of what nature?
Oh, the best nature in the world. A wedding.
If you mean Miss Fairfax and Frank Churchill, I have heard that already.
I did not see it. But then I seem to have been doomed to blindness.
Time, my dearest Emma. Time will heal the wound. He will soon be gone. You will forget him.
You are very kind, but you are mistaken. My blindness to what was going on led me to act in a way that I must always be ashamed of. But I have no other regret with respect to Mr. Churchill.
He is a disgrace to the name of man, and he is to be rewarded with the sweet young woman, Jane. Jane. You'll be a miserable creature. Everything turns out for his good. His aunt is in the way. His aunt dies. He uses everybody ill, and they're delighted to forgive him. He is a fortunate man indeed.
You speak as if you envied him.
And I do envy him, Emma. In one respect, he is the object of my envy. You will not ask me why. You are determined, I see, to have no curiosity. You are wise. But I cannot be wise. I must tell you, Emma, what you will not ask, though I may wish it unsaid the next moment.
Oh, then do not speak it. If you wish to speak to me as a friend, or to ask my opinion, as a friend, I will hear whatever you like.
As a friend, Emma, that, I fear, is a word. Tell me, Emma, have I no chance of ever succeeding? My dearest Emma, for dearest you will always be, my dearest, most beloved Emma, tell me at once. I cannot make speeches. If I loved you less, then I might be able to talk about it more, but you know what I am. I have lectured you, and I have blamed you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England could have borne it. God knows I have been a very indifferent lover, but you understand me. Yes, you understand my feelings, and you will return them if you can. At present, I ask only to hear, once to hear your voice. Will you marry me?
No, I cannot. Harriet.
Harriet?
She's in love with you, and she believes that you may love her too.
Harriet Smith marries Robert Martin.
And you've shown her kindness and took notice of her at Donwell and spoke of farming and Robert Martin? No, this is impossible.
It is so indeed. I have it from Robert Martin himself. He left me not half an hour ago.
You cannot mean to say that Harriet Smith has accepted Robert Martin. You cannot mean that he has even proposed to her again. Yet, you only mean that he intends it.
I mean that he has done it and been accepted.
Good God. Well, now tell me everything. Make this intelligible to me. How? Where? When? Let me know all.
Before the end of September, Emma attended Harriet to church and saw her hand bestowed on Robert Martin with so complete a satisfaction as no remembrances, even connected with Mr. Elton as he stood before them, could impair. Perhaps indeed at that time she scarcely saw Mr. Elton, but as the clergyman whose blessing at the altar might next fall on herself, Robert Martin and Harriet Smith, the latest couple engaged of the three, were the first to be married. And Mr. Elton was called on within a month from the marriage of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Martin to join the hands of Mr. Knightley and Miss Woodhouse. The wedding was very much like other weddings, where the parties have no taste for finery or parade, and Mrs. Elton, from the particulars detailed by her husband, thought it all extremely shabby and very inferior to her own.
Very little white satin, very few lace veils, a most pitiful business. Selina would stare when she heard of it.
But in spite of these deficiencies, the wishes, the hopes, the confidence, the predictions of the small band of true friends who witnessed the ceremony were fully answered in the perfect happiness of the union.
Thank you for joining us for Emma. A big thanks again to our friend, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. Visit him at his website, shakespeareapproves.com, or on Facebook at Shakespeare Approves, your friendly neighborhood Shakespeare. We've got links to all of his content and some of our content in the comments of this video. We would once again like to thank all of these actors who have volunteered to read with us this evening. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this reading, all of our past readings are available on our Facebook page and a little bit better organized on our website, zenithplayers.com. If you want more information on us, including how to be one of these actors, you can go to our Facebook page, Zenith Players, and send us a message, or send an email to casting@zenithplayers.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. We want to continue to express our support to everyone out there working to keep us safe and those continuing to protest and demonstrate. Join us next Monday for The Canterville Ghost, and this Saturday as we return to Shakespeare for our 50th live reading, King Lear.